with Tenderly to help you do many good things with Binance Smart Chain. We're delighted to have Bogdan here on what is his Christmas day. So I think we're yeah, a little extra special in that respect. But thank you for joining us, Bogdan. And yeah, we'll do a presentation, then we'll go to Q&A, guys. As you know, for all you kind of Encode hackers, well, maybe we have some non-Encode hackers here as well. This is part of the Encode hackathon, of which Binance are a gold sponsor, where you can build some fantastic things. It's aimed at students and also hackers around the world, and lots of great challenges, lots of great prizes. I'll post the links throughout the event for those of you that are a little bit new to this, or you want to familiarize yourself with the various parts, the various facets of the hackathon. Alrighty then, well, without further ado, over to you, Bogdan, and please share your screen and let's get going. Delighted to have you. Thank you for coming.
Sure thing. So hi, everyone. Happy holidays, wherever you are in the world, whichever calendar you use and everything else. So I guess the first question as always is, do you guys see the screen?
I do, so we're good.
Awesome, great. So we can start. As Anthony mentioned, we're going to have basically two parts. One of them is going to be about monitoring in general. It's actually three parts. The second one being the how you can use Tenderly to achieve the things that we talked about, and then finally we will talk about, I mean, questions and answers and maybe some specific questions about monitoring in general. So basically, why do we need monitoring and everything else? We have been working on Tenderly for I think 2.5 years now, and we not just DeFi exploding. I mean, with the prices and everything else happening in the last couple of weeks, we saw like this huge need to monitor what's happening on chain. But for the last 2 years, on not just Ethereum mainnet, on the Binance Smart Chain, on other layer 2 solutions and everything else, basically we saw this burst of DeFi projects interacting with each other and basically having these complex interactions that nobody actually knows exactly what is happening. So we had also things like flash loan attacks, because everything is happening on chain, everything is open, and then people need like days to reason about what actually happened, what the hacker did, for example. And basically we can prevent that with monitoring, or if it happens, we can know much faster what happened after the fact. So that's why we're having this conversation. So as Anthony already mentioned, hi everyone, my name is Bogdan. I'm coming from Tenderly. I'm one of the co-founders, and I'm a distributed systems engineer. So you can at the end ask me engineering questions in general. It doesn't have to be for this, but I think this, at least the first part of this, might be interesting to the business folks in the crowd as well. So the title of this talk is Fantastic Metrics and Where to Find Them. I was quite happy. I'm quite sure that I needed more time to think of a good name for the presentation and actually coming up with the whole presentation, but I'm quite happy with this. So let's cover what is monitoring, when to start monitoring, and then finally is monitoring dApps and protocols. So basically the first two is in the Web 2.0 world that we call like the traditional cloud development now, what monitoring is, and then we can see what can we learn from that community, and then afterwards we can see how to transfer that to things that are being on the blockchain, and then how can we do even maybe something better due to the nature of the transparency of the chain itself. So let's start with the first thing, and then if you like do the classic thing of Googling like what is monitoring, you get this quite boilerplate explanation of like tools and processes by which you measure and manage your IT systems. And of course, like most definitions on Wikipedia, this isn't useful at all, but the things that we need to think about here is the tools and processes part. So how can we maybe think of it in a different way, at least how I like to look at it, is that we have metrics which are generated by the system. So basically the system is emitting some values which mean nothing by themselves, but then we as DevOps engineers or normal engineers, product engineers, basically use those metrics to actually generate some business value. Because at the end of it, we are building things to bring value to the people. We're not building things just to build things, as it is fun, but we all aspire to making something that will change lives or bring some value to people, basically. So thinking of this, we can think of it like in two ways: the business part of things and then the system part of things. So let's cover first the business side of things. Basically, the business, what do they care about? They or we care about. I started doing the us versus them thing now. But basically, the business cares about the user experience data. That's the first thing. Then it's used for product decisions. and it's used for technology investment. So basically, the business person doesn't care that the 99th percentile in the Web 2.0 world, for example, doesn't care that the 99th percentile of the responses that we return from a server is, I don't know, 750 milliseconds. The user experience data is, we want every user interaction to be less than half a second. The business doesn't care like the technical aspects of it. They care about what the user sees and what the user experiences. And then basically the business can use the data to make product decisions. So for example, this flow is much slower, or we can change it like this. So the technological part of things can do something in the background, for example, so we can be sure that this is the best flow possible. And then finally, which is important for us engineers, is that it's used for technology investments. Usually the business person in the team will won't, let's say, green light the decision to, okay, yes, let's use this technology just for the fun of it. It's usually, okay, what value does this bring to the user and the business? So this data is really, really, really important to make business decisions. So then we have the systems side of things. And here we have also a couple of things. It's the state of the system. And what do I mean by state of the system? But state of the system is, in the traditional development, for example, amount of RAM used on the server, or for example, the CPU usage on the server, the swap used, etc. So stuff like that, state of the system. The systems people, and by systems people, I usually mean engineers, use those metrics and everything generated to detect problems. And we can see at which points of development the detection itself can happen. So it's used to detect problems. It's used to diagnose and resolve faults. So another thing, when something happens, we want to resolve it as soon as possible. So we will use our logs, we'll use our metrics, we'll use, I don't know, Prometheus, Grafana, whatever we have in the Web 2.0 world, for example, to see what went wrong and to see how to fix it as soon as possible. So we have like the business side of things covered, we have the systems side of things covered. So that like what monitoring is. But usually when you talk about something in isolation, what it is, it makes no sense. Usually people then ask, okay, I understand what this means, I understand what is it used for, but I think much more important for monitoring is when to actually start doing it, because most people do it in the wrong way, and we will see how. So we can, how can we say, differentiate three levels of monitoring. So basically we have the manual one, we have the reactive one, and we have the proactive one, and we'll cover each one of those. So most people and projects and everything else start with the manual one. So what does this mean? Let's move to our blockchain world. So for example, imagine working on your Binance Smart Chain project, on your hackathon. It goes great, you win a prize, you continue working on it. And then each morning you wake up, you open up Etherscan to actually check if everything is working correctly. You check if there were any faults, you check if there were any reverts, if the system is working as it should. It's quite a stressful thing to do. I remember numerous times, both working on the blockchain and in the Web 2.0 world, waking up in the middle of the night actually and checking the logs, for example, or checking Etherscan to see if everything is working correctly. It is definitely something you don't want to experience and you don't want to do. So it's something we check periodically. The worst thing that checking periodically is that the user is actually the one that lets you that something isn't working. There's that whole joke of projects that have the largest QA in the world, which is basically their users. But basically, there's nothing worse than getting a bug report from a user that something critical isn't working, especially now in DeFi and everywhere else where real money is taken into consideration. And usually we start doing all of this, so you wouldn't be checking Etherscan or checking your logs for something that the user said. You will only start doing this once something fails for the first time. And that is really, really bad, because at least one user had a bad experience with that part of the system, or at least some funds were lost in case of DeFi, where some funds the last couple of weeks, it seems, isn't less than $5 million equivalent of some cryptocurrency. So it's really bad to do the manual one, because you only react to things after the fact, and only because you think you have to, not because you want to. So that was like the manual one. So let's cut to the reactive one, which I think like 70% of projects, both in blockchain and Web 2.0 world, are reactive. And by reactive, I mean the monitoring itself is based on simple thresholds. So for example, we can say, If more than 20% of the transactions revert, send me a notification because something probably isn't working. Or if I didn't have any transactions in the last 3 hours, it's either that people aren't using my project or this isn't the behavior I expected, so I'm going to check. So it's like based on like these really simple rules. It is definitely a move to using the data that we acquire in both in the Web 2.0 and both in the blockchain world. It is some movement towards using the data itself to measure customer experience. And by customer experience, I mean basically the KPIs or the metrics that we're following as a product, as a business, to actually see if we're moving in the direction we want to. Then the updates tend to be reactive in response to incidents and outages. This is quite similar to the manual approach. A user finds a bug that happens, I don't know, in this specific case, we fix the bug and then we add monitoring around it to be sure that it doesn't happen again. But again, a user had a bad experience. It isn't good for our product. It isn't good for our brand. And it's definitely not fun as an engineer to participate in that. But as I mentioned, around 80% of the projects that I know of in both Web 2.0 and 3.0 worlds are reactive. And this is a really good step. It's much better than the manual one. And then finally, usually it's the last step at the application or infrastructure deployments. And I think this is the most important one. So basically, when people start working on all of these things, you start coding, you start doing mockups, you start doing your UI, connecting your backend with the UI, connecting the blockchain with the UI. And only after you finished everything, you go, oh, this might fail. Should I add something that should check or alert me if this fails? And when you're doing it at like the last part of the development itself, you will definitely miss not only edge cases, but like miss really important situations where your application can end up in. And basically then you find out by users actually reporting it to you. Okay, so the proactive one, which I think is the best one, but it's definitely the hardest one to achieve. So basically it's the core to managing the infrastructure in the business. And this by this, I mean, as much as you think coding is a really important part of building your DeFi project or building on top of the Binance Smart Chain, you should think of monitoring as an equivalently or even more important step while building your product, especially as your future products might manage millions and millions of assets. It focuses on measuring the application performance and business outcomes. So in the Web 2.0 world, we will probably be measuring how optimal some flows are, the average response times and stuff like that. For example, in the Web 3.0 world, the thing that most people, especially that ever worked on the Ethereum mainnet know, the gas prices are really high. So it's really important to measure that our application is doing as much as it can to save the user's funds while they're running transactions. So basically not to overspend money on transactions. There is a focus on measuring the quality of service and the customer experience. So all of this data, we're not just collecting it for the fun of it. We're making specific dashboards that product and business people can understand and make decisions on. And then we can see, for example, if a new feature that we added, people are actually using it. Or for example, if we do a protocol upgrade, we see if users are actually migrating to the new version of the protocol. And this was a huge thing, for example, in the mainnet Ethereum system when MakerDAO was moving from Psi into DAI. So for a very long time, people didn't migrate their funds, and it took a couple of months, if I'm correct, or it's not even finished yet. So it's really important to focus on measuring the quality of the service and the customer experience around that service that we're providing. And then finally, the products will not be considered feature complete until we have monitoring. So it's not enough just to deploy your DeFi app. It's not enough to deploy your front end. It's not enough to deploy your backend services. You are not done until you have monitoring. And this is really hard to achieve. And I'm going to be totally honest with some features that we do here, for example, as well. We do monitoring after the fact if we think the feature is mission critical, but you should always, always, always strive into having monitoring one of the most important steps in building something out for your product. So, as I mentioned, so we cannot consider products as done or feature complete, or we cannot deploy them at all until we have monitoring so we can know what's actually happening. So we covered what is monitoring. We have covered basically how the business and the system side of things use metrics and what metrics really are and why they are important. We also covered when to start monitoring. So finally, the most important thing, I guess, for the crowd here is how to monitor actually the apps and protocols. So as I mentioned, the first one, and now I'm going to start slowly to be showing the UI of Tenderly, but for example, gas usage is an important one to see how much gas your transactions are spending. And this is important on the Ethereum mainnet, for example, because the gas prices are quite crazy. So a normal token transfer costs, I think, like around $80 the last couple of days, something like $70 or $80. I can't remember. So it's really important to have it as optimal as possible. Even on chains that have like really cheap gas prices, you still have the gas limit of the block. So you need to be sure that the logic you're executing inside of your transaction can fit there actually. Optimization comparison. So that is also interesting. Let's say, for example, we have a new version of our smart contract and we want to be sure that the new version is spending less gas than the first version, so we can see that our efforts of optimizing the code actually paid off. This one I already mentioned. So this is, for example, the protocol version comparison. This is the 0x protocol, for example, during their migration in February and March of 2020. So basically they had two versions of it. And here we can see a chart comparing if more people are using V2 or V3. And at this point in time, when we're looking at it, more people were still using version 2. So they can maybe see if the incentives are correct. And basically speaking on incentives, we can do, for example, incentive comparison. So if you have something like oracles, off-chain oracles, or having basically anything that needs a financial incentive for people to do, you can actually plot stuff out and check for your product in Tenderly or any other analytics and monitoring solution. Actually see if people are doing what you want them to be doing basically on your protocol or dApp. Emitted events is also an easy one. So basically events were added to the EVM. So it's also supported on the Binance Smart Chain. Events are used for people off-chain looking at transactions to see if something happened. So it's really good to look at if your system is emitting events as you expect it to. It's a good heartbeat of the system, as we call it. And I mean, you can look at it in a different way. This might be a better way just to see like a top list of the events that are getting emitted. Function calls, this one is, for example, important if you want to spot hacks. So for example, if somebody's calling a function that you don't expect to be called a lot, and you see it at the top of the list or near the top of the list, you can maybe think something's fishy going on, and you can check your logs or check it tenderly and see if someone is trying to do something fishy, basically. And then outlier detection, which might be the most interesting one for detecting ongoing attacks. You have a DeFi protocol or a DeFi app, you have thousands of people using it, and then at some point in the middle of the night, you see a particular address making dozens of times or more calls than everyone else. That is really good to actually check and say, oh, okay, so it seems somebody's trying to do something. Should I pause my protocol? Should I make like a governance update so they cannot do anything or stuff like that? So it's really important to do that. So basically, what I want you to take away from the first part of the presentation is definitely to monitor from day one. So it's important to do monitoring as soon as possible. Then the second one is that both business and technical metrics matter. So it's not only technical metrics. So engineers, please do business metrics. And then business people, please let your engineers do technical metrics because they're really important for the business and the product as well. And then finally, be proactive, not reactive. It's much easier. It's much less stressful. It's much easier to do things this way. So I see 8 things in the chat. I guess I can move to the questions for the first part. Sure. Okay. So Smithy asked, what does this have to do with the Binance Smart Chain? That's a good question. I guess you will see an answer on the second part of the presentation. This was more monitoring in general, where you can basically see what monitoring is. So now when I show you while working on the Binance Smart Chain, how this can actually help you. So Smithy, I hope in the next couple of minutes, your question will be answered. Before I move on to the second part of the presentation, does anybody have any more questions about the slides and the things I talked about?
I think it's one about docs to be provided.
Okay, so we don't have that much of a public-facing documentation, but you can see most things on our landing page, and then also we have a lot of stuff on our blog regarding Tenderly. But I will also run you through it now, and you can see there how it works as well.
Okay, cool.
Awesome. I guess I can then move on to the second part.
Yeah, go for it.
Sure thing. Okay, so here is Tenderly, and let's make. Oh, I see another thing in the chat just before I move on. Is there a cost to Tenderly? There is a pro version of Tenderly, but everything I'm going to show you now is free, and I think you're going to see it's the best free tier project in the blockchain space. So it's basically a no-brainer to use it. For developers, it's much more useful than, for example, Etherscan or BlockScout, or using like a debugger and Remix or anything else. So you'll see now. And then there is also the pro version, which is basically catered toward teams, and it has like a bunch of collaboration features and API access, which most projects that are just starting out or people on hackathons don't actually need. And also, as we're partners with Binance, you can also reach out to me or Anthony or from someone from Binance X, for example, to connect to us. So we're also grandfathering some licenses of Tenderly Pro for teams that are building on the Binance Smart Chain, because we want to help out this ecosystem grow. Awesome. So moving on. So let's make a project here. So I can do this. It's a demo. I'm going to make an empty project, and I prepared two contracts basically that we can use to see how Tenderly works. So to add your smart contracts into Tenderly, you can do it in a couple of ways. We'll use the first one, which is like import verify, but we also, for example, offer browser upload. So basically you can do something similar to Etherscan. So you can either upload files from the file system or do the Solidity compiler JSON. And also we have a CLI where you can install our CLI, and then, for example, integrate Tenderly as part of a CI/CD pipeline, which a lot of teams do. So basically, when you deploy something on chain, you can add it to Tenderly as well. So import verified. So I have two contracts here. Let's import this one first. So when I search an address here, it will actually search across not only the Binance Smart Chain, but basically all of the networks that are supported in Tenderly. So it's the Binance Smart Chain, the Binance Smart Chain testnet, and then Mainnet, Gurley, Kovan, Ropsten, Rinkebai, Matic, XDAI, and BOA. So we'll add this lottery contract that we have here, and let's add another one just so we have a couple. So add more. I'm going to add another one here. We have the Smart Chef smart contract from the Binance Smart Chain. So the first thing that we can see is the transactions one. So this is similar to what you would expect from Etherscan, for example, but this actually shows the aggregation of all of the contracts that are added to a project. Now we see the Smart Chef one is the one that has more transactions. So we see it here in the first page. But for example, if I pick the lottery one and click filter, I can instantly see transactions that happened there. Now we see a failed transaction here, and we can see the first feature of Tenderly. So when we open up the transaction itself, we can see a stack trace that you would expect from a programming language of 2021. And basically anyone working with Solidity and on any EVM enabled blockchain will know that stack traces don't exist. So this is a really useful feature to instantly see that something isn't working and see exactly where. So if you would open this up in an Explorer, for example, here you will only see, okay, it's failed with error, and here we have the revert message. But for example, if it reverted due to gas issues or something like that, it would just say reverted and that's it. So we wouldn't have any idea why the transaction actually failed. So that's like the first one, but let's dive a bit deeper. So I'm going to open up a successful transaction because those were more fun to look at. So let's see this one. Yeah, good. Okay. So first of all, and I'm going to open So I'm going to be jumping from question to question, everything else. So what change does Tenderly work with? Tenderly works with the Binance Smart Chain, Binance Smart Chain testnet, Kovan, Gurley, Mainnet, Rinkebai, Ropsten, Matic, XDAI, BOA. So yeah, only EVM compatible blockchains. Yeah. It also works with your local chain as well. So I'm going to be showing that later on. So James, I hope that answers your question. Anywho, so here we have something that we call the transaction overview, which we basically see not only the calls between contracts, but actually calls to functions themselves. And let's see this one. This might be interesting. So here we can see what exactly is happening there, but let's make this even more interesting. Let's go here and I can save view in debugger. And basically here you have a fully fledged debugger. So you can check input variables, output variables. So here we see the output is true. And then if we walk through this, you can, for example, see at some points also like the state variables. Here, there are no state variables are changed right now, so we don't see any state variables here at the bottom right-hand corner. Here we can also see, so we also decode stuff like structs, stuff like arrays and everything else. So this is really useful while you're debugging both failed and successful transactions. So basically a debugger you would expect from a normal programming language, you have it here in Tenderly. So that's like the first thing, the overview, we saw it here. And then we have the debugger here that which we can use to actually introspect and see what the transaction is doing. The second one, which is interesting, is we can go to the contract screen, basically. Now, this transaction here is only calling the smart shift smart contract. So we do nothing in the rest of the contracts. But for example, if I open up the transaction in an alternate project that I have here, just give me a second. So let's do a Kyber network one because they touch like a lot of contracts, so it might be interesting. So as we're all building different products, they integrate with each other. If we go here and go to the contracts tab and just give it a second to load, here we can, so for example, see all of the contracts that participated in a transaction. So it's really interesting to, for example, find out about dependencies that we didn't know upon both upstream and downstream. So that's really useful. So back to our project here. The next one here is events. So here we can see the events that are emitted. Tenderly automatically pulls all of the information from Etherscan and push products and push contracts into Tenderly, and basically uses that information to decode things without you actually having to do it by hand. Again, on Etherscan, for example, you can see the transfers decoded as they're like ERC20, but for example, here we have much complex. So for example, trade executed in Kyber network, it has been automatically decoded from some gibberish here, which means nothing, into something that might be useful to a developer. So that's events. State changes. I saw we have a question. I'm going to go through the rest of the tabs and then I'm going to address it. The next one here is the state changes. So also Tenderly decodes everything in the state that changed. So even when you have like these complex mapping types into tuples, here you can see it decoded automatically for you. So you can basically deep dive and see what is happening. And last but not least, we have the gas profiler, which you saw in the slides. Basically, you can deep dive into transactions and see which function is using the most gas and then optimize and save your users money. So it's really useful to actually see where you can optimize. And this is a really interesting diagram. It's used, for example, in embedded systems programming to it's called the flame graph, to do profiling of the CPU. And it's really interesting that you can basically use the same way of showing information to debug stuff for the Ethereum virtual machine. So we had a question which said, for a hackathon, what usage from Tenderly would there be, since a hackathon project typically does not have many transactions except tests? Okay, so Curtsy, I hope I pronounced it correctly. So that's a really good question. So during the hackathon, you can actually use all of this to, if you're working on your smart contracts and you have your transactions failing, I guess the most useful thing would be the stack traces. So you can see exactly why and how your transactions are failing. So that's the first part of it, especially if you will be integrating with other on-chain protocols. It's usually a huge hassle to do it without something that decodes stuff automatically for you and checks for errors. So I guess that's the first one. The second one would be probably the gas profiler. If you're doing complex transactions, it would be really important to use as less gas as possible. And then finally, a thing that I will show you here, basically we have local transactions, which I'm not going to be showing now, but here you can see it like in the documentation, how it works. But basically, Tenderly allows you to use our CLI, which you install on Windows, Linux, or Mac OS. Where basically, while you're developing locally, there are two ways you can use it. So the first thing is you can just, for example, fork the mainnet if you're working with the mainnet, and then you can do Tenderly
Oh, I think we've lost Bogdan here. Bogdan, are you there? You there? Is it my Wi-Fi?
Might be working now.
Ah, you froze there, Bogdan.
Ah, okay. Sorry. So what was the last thing you guys heard? I just saw my Wi-Fi drop for a sec.
I can't remember. It was only like 10 seconds.
Okay, so basically just going to sorry for the freeze. The router is really bad. So basically, as I mentioned, so the tooling that we saw here, you can basically use it with our CLI. So you install our CLI on Linux, Mac OS, or Windows. You do tenderly export in a transaction hash from a local ganache node, for example, or a local Hardhat node, or whatever you use for local development. And basically you can use all of the tooling that you saw here for transactions that you're running locally during the hackathon. So Hertzie, I hope that answers your question. Anywho, moving on. And I'm again, sorry guys for the internet freeze there for a sec. So moving on. So we saw the overview, the contract screen, events, state changes, debugger, guest profiler, and then we can use that all locally via our CLI. But let's see something even more interesting. So all of the transactions, of course, have some inputs and everything else. So an interesting thing that we can do is we can re-simulate transactions. So we can actually take any on-chain transaction and change its parameters. So for example, here, I'm going to change this to another address. Let's put it this one, and this will probably fail. So now I'm going to simulate transactions. Oh, there wasn't actually even enough gas to do this one, so I couldn't do the simulation itself. But basically, what you can do is you can do different simulations, and I'm going to open here an existing one. So you can re-simulate things, and let's do, I don't know, this one for the exchange that I did way back when. I can here do a simulation and see what it would do even if I change some of the parameters, basically. And it's really, 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 really interesting to do it that way. So you can also simulate historical transactions. That's the first one. And then you can, so for example, change the block number, change the transaction index, or change the address that's sending it. Or for example, I can change the gas price, the value, or if I'm doing something else. So these are quite, yeah. So this is get multiplier. I can do like the from and to, or if we're doing, let's see if there is more of a complex transaction here. You can basically use this to see what the transaction would do. All of these have only a couple. So here, for example, randomness and lottery ID. But if we were using something more complex, again, let's use Kyber network here and do something more complex like this one. Basically, you enter all of the information, click simulate, and see even what will happen in the pending block if the transaction is mined, if you check the use pending block feature. So that was the simulator, basically. We have analytics, so you get a couple of dashboards out of the box. So here we have like the transactions over time plotted. We have the events emitted over time. Those are the ones that I mentioned on the slide. So for example, top callers, ETH value. So this didn't transfer in ETH. Top events that were made, daily active users, weekly active users, which is also an interesting one to look at, and then the monthly active users. But basically, you can even do your own graphs. So here I can do, okay, let's see the used gas, for example, the average gas used per function in each contract. And then let's do that in the last 7 days, and then let's break it down by the hour. And as you can see, like this was really fast. So we do no caching on our side. Everything is done on the fly, and you can do like really complex things and actually see things that you might want to do with the analytics feature. And then, I mean, you have a bunch of properties that you can do and do aggregations on top of that. And then I can save this, for example, in like this gas used graph, for example. And now I always, when I come into Tenderly, I will have it here ready to go and check if everything is working as expected. So moving on to alerting. This might be also an interesting one for the hackathon. So basically, you can do different alerts in Tenderly. So we have the ones that you might be accustomed to. So like successful and failed transactions. You can check if a particular function was called, if an event was emitted. We're going to come back to this one. You can check, for example, for ERC20 transfers, if a particular address did make the call or didn't make the call. ETH balance of an address, the value of a transaction, if a state particularly changed. But let's go with the event parameter one because it really shows like how powerful this is. So let's go with Smart Chef here. And let's pick, I don't know, withdraw an amount event. So now when I pick amount, we automatically know it's an integer, so you can actually do like different operators with it. If it was an array, you can actually check if like contains any of the specific values, or doesn't contain a specific value. And then if we pick, I don't know, if it's greater than or equal to 1,000, whatever this means in this protocol, I can basically in real time get alerts on Slack, Telegram, Discord, Sentry, and PagerDuty. And this is important for the proactive monitoring that I mentioned during the presentation. And it can be like as simple as doing like, okay, just tell me if there's a successful transaction in a project and you get when that happens, but it can be like really complex. So for example, for the state change, it can go like, let's pick the lottery one. So if the, let's see which one would be interesting. Okay, GXP number, whatever that means. You can, for example, get alerts when the threshold is passed, when there is a percentage change where a certain criteria is met, or when the value is changed in general. So it's really, 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 really fun to use, and it kind of gives you a heartbeat or a pulse on your whole system. And it's really, so that's basically what I wanted to show now. There's a couple of more features, especially for hackathons. Collaboration might be interesting because you can add people, but everything I showed you now is free. So none of these features are behind any paywall or anything else. There are some quotas. So for example, on the free plan, you can only do like 50 simulations per month, which is more than enough. You can do unlimited exports from your local node, for example. For alerting, you can do like 20 alerts, which is more than enough for a project just starting out. And then for transactions and everything else, you can do it like as much as you want. And you also don't need to make a project. So if I picked any of these transactions and I take the hash here and search it tenderly, so you can even use this completely logged out if you want. So here, if you look at it, I will even, sorry, someone is ringing, just a second. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for that. It was the neighbor trying to check for something. So basically, if I pick any transactions I logged out, basically Tenderly also has a public explorer. So here we can see I'm logged out. So if I paste in the transaction hash that we copied, I open up the transaction and we can see it here, and we can use all of the features that I just show you without even creating an account. So I guess that shows that the free tier is actually quite useful even for the hackathon. So that was basically the demo of Tenderly. Sorry, sorry for the doorbell ring there. And yeah, any questions?
Cool, guys. Any questions at all about Tenderly? So where can we find all of this, Bogdan? Where should they be looking?
Sure thing. So I already pasted some of the things there, but basically you can go to our landing page and start there. The Explorer that I just showed can be found. Just give me a second on back here on this link here. And then an interesting blog that will probably be a really good starter for everyone is the 10 ways here, this one. So basically 10 ways to use Tenderly to save time while developing. So those are the things. And also it would be great if you guys can follow us on Twitter because we post most of our updates there. We tweet almost daily. And also when there are like DeFi hacks and stuff like that, we also do like deep dive analysis of those.
Cool. Good. Any questions, guys? Well, what we will do, we'll put the video up for this later today, and we'll put the slides up as well. Not the slides, there weren't slides, so it'll just be the video in this case.
Sure. I can send you the slides as well if you want in the PDF format. Anthony,
that'd be great. Google Sheets, PDF, whatever suits really. Sure. All right, guys. Well, thank you for joining us. This was an earlier slot than usual. So I imagine some Americans might watch this on the YouTube rather than. But Bogdan, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. Merry Christmas.
Thank you. And thank you for having me.
Speak to you, hackers. See you hacking soon. Thank you very much, guys.
Good luck, everyone, with your projects. Do reach out to us. Bye.